The moment lasted just seconds, but the shift in Vladimir Putin's expression told the entire story. Confidence giving way to disbelief. Control yielding to recalculation. The Russian president, master of the political chess game, suddenly finding himself in an unexpected check. What happens when a young military leader from one of Africa's poorest nations challenges one of the world's most powerful autocrats on his home turf? The 2023 Russia-Africa Summit in Moscow was designed as Putin's showcase, a carefully orchestrated demonstration that despite Western sanctions and isolation, Russia remained a global power with strong African alliances. The script called for grateful African leaders to accept Russian offers of grain, weapons, and economic partnerships while providing Putin with valuable propaganda images. Instead, 35-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso shattered the diplomatic choreography with a bold speech that transformed the summit from a Russian monologue into a genuine negotiation. As cameras captured Putin's face cycling through surprise, respect, and strategic adaptation, international observers witnessed a rare moment of authentic geopolitical disruption. If you're fascinated by unexpected power shifts in global politics, hit subscribe now to never miss our analysis of world-changing moments. Today we examine how a military leader in a red beret rewrote the rules of engagement with a global superpower, and why Putin's reaction reveals volumes about the changing international order. Ibrahim Traoré emerged on the international stage in September 2022 when, at just 34 years old, he led Burkina Faso's second coup in 8 months. A former artillery officer with combat experience against jihadist insurgents, Traoré positioned himself as a nationalist reformer fighting against both terrorism and neo-colonial influence. Unlike many coup leaders, Traoré maintained a Spartan lifestyle, continuing to wear his military uniform and red beret even at formal diplomatic functions. His youth and revolutionary rhetoric resonated with Burkina Faso's predominantly young population, who saw him as a break from decades of corruption and foreign manipulation. Vladimir Putin, by contrast, entered the 2023 summit from a position of increasing international isolation. The Ukraine invasion had triggered unprecedented Western sanctions, and Russia desperately needed to demonstrate alternative partnerships. African nations, with their natural resources, UN votes, and strategic locations, represented critical allies in Putin's effort to prove Russia wasn't alone. The Russia-Africa Summit served multiple Russian objectives: securing new markets for Russian grain and weapons, gaining access to African minerals, and creating powerful visual evidence that Putin remained a respected global statesman despite Western condemnation. For African nations, the summit offered potential economic benefits, security partnerships, and leverage to negotiate better terms with both Russia and Western powers competing for influence across the continent. But sometimes, the most significant diplomatic moments happen when the script gets completely abandoned. What was planned as a showcase of Russian influence would instead reveal the limits of great power diplomacy in a rapidly changing world order. Moscow's Kremlin palace gleamed with imperial grandeur as delegates from 49 African nations gathered for the second Russia-Africa Summit in July 2023. Crystal chandeliers illuminated marble columns while Russian and African flags created a carefully balanced visual backdrop. Security personnel outnumbered delegates, reflecting both Russian protocol and the high-stakes nature of the gathering. The summit opened with calculated pageantry. Russian cultural performances preceded formal welcomes, with each African leader receiving precisely 17 seconds of handshake time with Putin before being directed to assigned seating. The physical arrangement spoke volumes. Russian officials occupied elevated positions on the central stage while African delegates sat in tiered sections below. Initial speeches followed predictable patterns. Putin promised expanded grain shipments to address food security concerns, offered military cooperation against terrorism, and emphasized Russia's non-colonial approach to African partnerships. African representatives were expected to express gratitude, accept proposed terms, and provide the supportive presence Russia needed for its international image. Among the delegates, clear hierarchies emerged. Leaders from larger nations like Egypt and South Africa received preferential treatment, while representatives from smaller countries like Burkina Faso were positioned literally and figuratively at the margins. Have you ever been in a situation where everyone underestimated someone who then completely changed the game? As the first day concluded, no one suspected that the young man in the red beret, seated far from the main stage, would transform the entire summit dynamic within hours. Like this video if you believe smaller nations deserve more respect on the global stage. When the morning session concluded, cameras captured Putin's swift exit with his inner circle. Behind closed doors, Russian officials launched into crisis management mode. What was planned as a showcase of Russian influence had transformed into an unexpected negotiation. The Russians were visibly scrambling, noted a West African diplomat who witnessed the behind-the-scenes activity. Foreign Minister Lavrov was directing staff to revise prepared statements while economic advisors huddled over laptops adjusting proposal terms. Putin's decades in power have honed his adaptability. Rather than appearing defensive or dismissive, responses that would have confirmed Traoré's critique, he chose a different approach. When sessions resumed after an extended 90-minute delay, Putin made a calculated move that surprised observers. Breaking protocol, he walked directly to Traoré's seat for a brief but public conversation before returning to the podium. This gesture accomplished multiple objectives. It acknowledged Traoré as a significant voice, demonstrated Putin's confidence, and visually reclaimed control of the proceedings. "We welcome the candid exchange of perspectives," Putin announced when reconvening the summit. Russia seeks partnerships based on mutual respect and sovereign equality. He then proposed a working group to develop new frameworks for cooperation that would address transparency concerns, effectively absorbing Traoré's critique and reframing it as Russia's initiative. This is where great power politics meets the unexpected reality of a changing world order. Putin's pivot revealed his pragmatism. Rather than resisting the disruption, he incorporated it into a revised narrative that preserved Russian leadership while making substantive concessions on partnership terms. Within weeks of the summit, tangible changes emerged in Russia-Burkina Faso relations. Nordgold, a Russian mining company operating in Burkina Faso, announced a restructured agreement including 30% local ownership, a dramatic increase from the previous 10%. Russian military advisors deployed to assist against jihadist insurgents now operated under a command structure giving Burkinabe officers final operational authority. These weren't isolated adjustments. Mali secured improved terms for Russian mercenary support, with greater transparency requirements and technology transfer provisions. Zimbabwe negotiated enhanced profit sharing for Russian mining operations, while Eritrea gained preferential pricing for grain imports. Traoré created a permission structure for other African nations, explained Dr. Nadia Omanov, international relations expert. Once he demonstrated that negotiation was possible, others quickly followed his approach. International media largely missed these substantive changes. Western outlets focused on the summit's anti-Western rhetoric, while Russian state media emphasized Putin's leadership. The real diplomatic breakthrough remained visible primarily to policy insiders. The summit's long-term implications extend beyond Africa-Russia relations. China has already adjusted its approach to African partnerships, with recent agreements including stronger local ownership provisions. European nations have launched reviews of their African engagement strategies, recognizing that the era of dictating terms has ended. For global power dynamics, the summit marked a significant evolution. Smaller nations demonstrated their willingness to leverage strategic importance rather than accepting whatever terms major powers offer. This shift reflects a multipolar world where influence flows in multiple directions rather than from great powers downward. Comment below with which country you think will be the next to challenge traditional power structures. Will another African nation follow Traoré's example, or will we see similar approaches in Asia or Latin America? In diplomatic circles, the Traoré effect has become shorthand for how smaller nations can successfully negotiate with major powers. Foreign ministries across Africa have studied the Burkina Faso approach, with several countries establishing dedicated teams to analyze the summit's lessons. The key insight isn't simply about boldness, it's about strategic leverage. Traoré succeeded because he identified Russia's vulnerability, its desperate need for international legitimacy following Western isolation. By framing his demands within Russia's own rhetoric about sovereignty and mutual respect, he created a position that Putin couldn't easily dismiss. Smaller nations have always had theoretical leverage, notes Ambassador Thomas Mbeki. What's changing is their willingness to use it. When you provide something a major power needs, resources, strategic location, or political support, you have negotiating power. For Russia, the summit revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths. While Putin's initial script was disrupted, his adaptive response demonstrated why he has survived decades in power. Rather than resisting change, he absorbed and redirected it, a capability many Western leaders lack. The broader lesson concerns the evolving nature of international relations. Traditional power hierarchies haven't disappeared, but they're increasingly contested. Countries once dismissed as minor players now demand substantive partnerships rather than patronage relationships. The question now is whether this moment represents a temporary disruption or a fundamental shift in how global politics operates. Are we witnessing isolated incidents of assertiveness, or the early stages of a new international system where power flows through more complex networks of interdependence? The lasting image from the 2023 Russia-Africa summit isn't a formal agreement or ceremonial handshake. It's Vladimir Putin's face as he processed the unexpected challenge from Ibrahim Traoré. That brief, unguarded moment captured a world in transition, traditional power confronting new realities, established hierarchies meeting emerging confidence. Diplomatic historians may well mark this summit as a turning point in Russia-Africa relations and possibly in the broader international order. Not because it dramatically altered global power distribution overnight, but because it visibly demonstrated that influence now flows in multiple directions. For everyday viewers, the Traoré-Putin exchange offers a powerful reminder that established systems remain vulnerable to disruption when challenged strategically. Whether in professional settings, community organizations, or personal relationships, the courage to respectfully question power, combined with clear understanding of your own leverage, can reshape seemingly fixed dynamics. The global chessboard continues to evolve, with new players increasingly willing to make bold moves rather than following predetermined patterns. The nations and leaders who recognize and adapt to this reality will shape the coming decades. For more analysis of the shifting global order and unexpected political moments, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Next week, how a small Pacific island nation forced climate concessions from world powers through an unprecedented legal strategy that caught the international community completely off guard.